I had probably the most hated job on the face of the earth. My hours were awful, my pay was shit, and it sucked all around. I was a telemarketer. Not because I wanted to be, mind you. Believe me, I hated calling people when they were in the middle of dinner, getting scolded at for even trying to call people at ungodly hours, getting sworn at and getting hung up on. However, the sad fact was that I majored in philosophy back in college and could not really do anything with it. Telemarketing was sadly one of the only jobs that paid the bills for a guy like me. I was not lazy. I would have loved to get into a better line of work. This job always felt like it was sucking my soul out, and the nights left me too exhausted to try and find another job. Not to mention, I had nothing else to put on my resume, so I doubted that anyone else would even hire me. I only found the guts to quit that telemarketing job after one particularly bad night back in early 2008. I remember having a horribly bad night of calls. Several people had done everything from yelling at me to holding their phone up to the screaming scene from The Exorcist. Who really cared if these people planned to vote for a president? I did not even plan to vote myself. I was not into politics. So why should I care if these people were? Because it was the only way I was getting a paycheck. I hated myself for it. I remember going down my list of numbers to a cell phone number for Monique Winthrop. Fuck me, I muttered under my breath. I hated cell phone calls the most. Lord only knew where they would be and what kind of horrible shit they could try and pull. Not to mention, if this woman was at a concert or something, she would have to scream before I could hear her. I know, it sounds like paranoia, but I had been through that kind of shit before so many times. I considered skipping it over entirely before I half-heartedly dialed the number and waited for the rings, counting them in my head. Between 4 and 6 was usually where the answering machine came in. Whenever I heard more than 8, I would just hang up and write it down as an unavailable. Corporate policy said that I should wait until 10, but I knew the pencil pushers upstairs really did not pay attention to these kinds of things. I managed to count to 6 before the phone was answered. I sighed to myself, at least glad that it was quiet on the other end. No annoying rock show or anything in the background. I waited for a hello, but I did not hear one. I continued to listen intently, sure that if I did not hear a hello, I would hear a click. I still heard nothing. Hello there. Is Miss Monique Winthrop available? I asked after a few seconds. Even I could hear how pathetic I sounded. What followed was a sound in the distance. Something not so close to the phone, but still audible. What I heard was the reason I quit my job. Thought you could hide in there, did you, you little cunt? I froze, hearing the voice of a screaming man on the other side of the phone. A moment later, I heard the higher scream of a woman and a sudden movement, as if the phone was knocked to the ground. My jaw was suddenly slack in horror. The woman on the other line continued to scream. I had no idea what to do. I just sat there, paralyzed in fear. Soon, her screams became mangled-sounding gargles. I then heard a child screaming, asking for his mother to be let go. There was a loud banging sound right near the phone, as if a person had crashed into the wall. The woman screamed again through the gargling, until her scream slowly faded away. The boy was screaming again, accompanied by the heavier breathing of a man who was yelling before. He continued to scream until I heard a loud snapping sound. Then the line went dead. Too stunned to say anything, I hung up the phone, gathered my things, and walked out of the agency that night. I never returned. It was a nice summer day. My 5-year-old son James was playing outside in the backyard of our suburban home. James has always been a quiet boy. He plays by himself mostly. He never had many friends, but he has a wild imagination. I was in the kitchen feeding our dog Fido when I heard what sounded like James talking to someone in the backyard. I'm not sure who it was he could be talking to. Could he have finally made a friend? Being a single mom, it's hard for me to always keep an eye on my son, so I decided to go outside and to check on him. When I went into the backyard, I was a bit confused, because James was the only one back there. Was he talking to himself? I could have sworn I heard another voice. "James, it's time to come inside," I called out to him. He came inside and sat down at the kitchen table. It was about lunchtime, so I decided to make him a turkey sandwich. "James, who were you talking to out there?" I asked. James looked up for a moment. "I was playing with my new friend," he said, smiling. I poured him some milk and continued to pry, as any good mother would. "Does your friend have a name? Why didn't you ask him to have lunch with us?" I asked. James stared at me for a moment before replying. "His name is Laughing Jack." I was a bit taken back by what he said. "Oh, that's a strange name. What does your friend look like?" I asked, a bit confused. "He's a clown. He has long hair and a big swirly cone nose. He's got long arms and baggy pants with stripy socks, and he always smiles." I realized my son was talking about an imaginary friend. I suppose it's normal for kids his age to have imaginary friends, especially when he has no real kids to play with. It's probably just a phase. The rest of the day went by as per usual, and it was starting to get late, so I put James to bed. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss goodnight, and made sure to turn on his nightlight before I closed the door. I was pretty tired myself, so I decided to go to bed not too long after. I had an awful nightmare. It was dark. I was in some kind of rundown amusement park. I was scared, running through an endless field of empty tents, broken down rides, and abandoned game huts. The whole place had a horrible look to it. Everything was black and white. The prized stuffed animals all hung from nooses in the game huts, all with sick grins stitched onto their faces. It felt like the whole park was looking at me, even though there wasn't another living thing in sight. Then suddenly, I began to hear music play. The sounds of Pop Goes the Weasel being played on a squeeze box echoed through the park. It was hypnotizing. I followed its tune to a circus tent, almost in a trance, unable to stop my legs from moving forward. It was pitch black. The only light came from a single spotlight shining on the center of the big top. As I walked toward the light, the music slowed down. I found myself singing along, unable to stop. All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought 'twas all in fun. The music stopped right before its climax, and suddenly, the lights shot on. The intensity of the lights was practically blinding. All I could see was a small dark silhouette shuffle towards me. Then, another one appeared, and another, and another. There were dozens of them, all coming towards me. I couldn't move. My legs were frozen. All I could do was watch as the haunting figures drew nearer. As they got closer, I could see they were children. As I looked at each one of them, I noticed they were all horribly disfigured and mutilated. Some had cuts all over their body, others were severely burnt, and others were missing limbs, even eyes. The children enveloped me, clawing at my flesh and dragging me to the ground and tearing inside of me. As the children tore me apart and I faded away, all I could hear was laughter. Horrible, awful, evil laughter. I woke up the next morning in a cold sweat. After taking a few breaths, I looked over and saw that a few of James's action figures were positioned facing me on top of my nightstand. I sighed. James had probably woken up early and put these here. I gathered up the toys and made my way to James's room. However, when I opened the door, James was sound asleep. I just shrugged and placed the toys back into his toy box and headed out for the living room. A little while later, James woke up and I made him his breakfast. He was quiet and seemed a bit groggy. Perhaps he didn't sleep well either. I decided to ask him about the toys. "James, honey, did you put the toys in Mommy's room this morning?" His eyes shot up at me for a moment, then quickly glanced back down at his cereal. "Laughing Jack did it." I rolled my eyes and responded, "Well, you tell Laughing Jack to keep the toys in your room." James nodded and finished up his breakfast, then decided to go play out in the backyard. I went to relax in the living room, and I must have dozed off because I woke up a couple hours later. Shit, I need to check on James. I was a bit worried. It had been over 2 hours, and I haven't even checked on him. I went and stepped out into the backyard, but James wasn't there anymore. I was getting nervous, so I called out to him. "James! James, where are you?" Just then, I heard a giggle come from the front yard. I rushed through the gate, around to the front of the house. James was sitting on the sidewalk. I breathed a sigh of relief and walked over to him. "James, how many times have I told you to stay in the backyard?" "James? What are you eating?" James looked up at me, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of hard candies in all colors. This made me very nervous. "James, who gave you that candy?" James just stared at me, not speaking. "James, please, tell Mommy where you got that candy." James hung his head down and said, "Laughing Jack gave it to me." My heart sunk. I kneeled down to look at him in the eye. "James, I've had enough of this damn Laughing Jack thing. He is not real. Now this is a very serious situation, and I need to know who gave you that candy." I could see my son's eyes tear up. "But Mama, Laughing Jack did give me that candy." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. James has never lied to me, but what he's telling me is impossible. I make him spit out the candy, and I throw the rest away. James appears to be fine. Maybe I'm just overreacting. After all, he could have gotten it from Tom and Linda from next door, or Mr. Walker down the street. Either way, I'm going to have to keep a closer eye on James. That night, I put James to bed as usual, and decided to go to bed early myself. Suddenly, I was woken up by a loud bang coming from the kitchen. I sprung out of bed and hurried down the stairs. When I got to the kitchen, I was horrified. Everything on the counters had been thrown to the floor, and our dog Fido hung dead from the light fixture. His stomach was cut open and stuffed with candy, the same type that James was eating earlier that day. My shock was quickly broken by a sharp scream coming from James's room, followed by loud crashes. I quickly grabbed a knife from the drawer and moved up the stairs with the speed that only a mother whose child is in danger could have. I burst through the door and flicked on the lights. Everything in the room was knocked over and tossed on the floor. My poor son in his bed, crying and shaking with fear, a pool of urine staining the sheets. I scooped my child up and ran out of the house and went next door to Tom and Linda's house. Luckily, they were still awake. They let me use their phone, and I called the police. It didn't take them long to arrive, and I explained what had happened. They looked at me as if I were crazy. They searched the house, but all they found was a dead dog and 2 trashed rooms. The officer had told me that someone had probably gotten into my house and done this right before making a quick escape when they heard me coming up the stairs. I knew it wasn't true. All the doors were locked, and none of the windows were open. Whatever was in my house didn't come in from outside. The next day, James stayed inside. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I went into the garage and found his old baby monitor and set it up in his room. If anything comes into it tonight, I was going to be able to hear it. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife from the drawer and put it on my nightstand. Imaginary friend or not, I'm not letting anything hurt my little boy. Soon enough, night came. I put James to bed. He was afraid, but I promised him that I wasn't going to let anything happen to him. I tucked him in, gave him a kiss, and turned on the nightlight. Before closing the door, I whispered to him, "Good night, James. I love you." I tried to stay up as long as I could, but after a few hours, I felt myself drifting off. My baby would be safe for the night, and I needed to sleep. Just as I laid my head on the pillow, I heard a soft noise come from the baby monitor I had put on my nightstand. At first, it sounded like interference, like the kind a radio would make. Then it turned into a soft moan. Was James asleep? Then I heard it, the laugh from my nightmare. That horrible laugh. I sprung up from my bed and then grabbed the knife from under my pillow. I rushed over to James's room and creaked the door open. I tried the light switch, but it wouldn't come on. I took a step in, and I could feel the warm, thick liquid on my feet. Suddenly, James's nightlight came on, and I could see the absolute horror laid out in front of me. James's body was nailed up on the wall, the nails piercing through his hands and feet. His chest was cut wide open, and his organs hung down to the floor. His eyes and tongue had been removed along with most of his teeth. I was disgusted. I could hardly believe this was my baby boy. Then I heard it again, the soft, desperate moan. James was still alive. My baby, my poor baby in so much pain, barely clinging to life. I ran across the room and vomited on the floor, but my sickness was interrupted by a horrible cackle coming from behind me. I spun around while still wiping bile from my mouth. Then out of the shadows emerged the fiend responsible for this horror, Laughing Jack. His ghost white skin and matted black hair hung down to his shoulders. He had piercing white eyes surrounded by dark black rings. His twisted smile revealed a row of sharp, jagged teeth, and his skin didn't look like skin at all. It almost looked like rubber or plastic. He wore a patchy, black and white clown outfit with striped sleeves and socks. His body itself was grotesque, his long arms hanging down past his waist, and the way he was poised made him look almost boneless, like a rag doll. He let out a sickening laugh, as if to let me know he was pleased with my reaction to his work. He then turned around slowly in front of James and began to laugh even more at the horrific sight he has laid out. That was enough to shake me from my terror. I snapped, "Get away from him, you bastard!" I rushed at the monster, raising the knife above my head and stabbed down at him. But as soon as the knife touched him, he disappeared into a cloud of black smoke. The knife passed right through and pierced James's still beating heart, splashing the warm blood on my face. No. What have I done? My baby. I killed my baby. I immediately fell to my knees, and I could hear the sirens in the distance growing louder. My boy. My sweet baby boy. I promised Mommy would protect you, but I failed. I'm sorry, James. I'm so sorry. Police soon arrived to find me in front of my son, still wielding the knife covered in my baby's blood. The trial was short. Insanity. I was placed in the Ferropolis house for the criminally insane, where I've been for the past 2 months. It's not so bad here. The only reason I'm awake now is because someone is playing Pop Goes the Weasel outside my window. I'll talk to the orderlies about it in the morning. Somebody once said, "We are either alone in this universe, or we are not." Both thoughts are equally terrifying. It is an interesting thought, and a mystery that may go on forever. The mistake this generation of people make is assuming that they are untouchable, that they know everything there is to know already, and that anything else is merely a bonus. Let me tell you, there is one almighty assumption that people make, a mistake that has been made for thousands of years, a secret which will continue to haunt the human race until the end of time. You see, I made this discovery when I was very small. I was taken away from my parents at a young age and have little to no memory of them. I've never actively gone about trying to contact them, nor does it even seem likely I could even if I tried. Paul and Janet are my life now. They're not my mom and dad to me, and they never will be. As I know, they are not my real parents. That's not to say they haven't treated me well. They've always done an excellent job raising me, and I could never criticize them for anything. They've done everything for me, despite my condition. I'm unable to speak. My hearing has always been fine, and they were fully aware of this when they adopted me as a baby. Intellectually, I'm fine. It is literally just my speech. I remember trying to talk even from a young age, but I couldn't. The frustration of understanding more and more words as I got older and wanting to speak them and just not being able to formulate them in my mouth crushed me. But I got used to it. It no longer bothers me in the slightest. In fact, it is my greatest strength. Paul came home from work recently, while Janet was out. I came from my room to greet him, and I got the usual hug. I'm 14 now, and I don't quite get the same attention as I did when I was little, but it suffices. I don't require the attention that I did. It distracts me from working out what he's really up to. I'd seen him bring in huge stacks of cash over recent weeks, often tens of thousands at a time. At first, I thought they were casino successes, but that just didn't add up. He'd been bringing home a similar sized pile of cash once a week for the previous 2 months or so. He brought this cash home and laid it out on the table each Wednesday night, which just so happens to be when Janet goes out to see her personal trainer. The phone calls too. They seemed off. He would constantly look around to see if anybody was watching, as he gave brief one-word answers. I found it astonishing that he was so clumsy that he would never check to see whether I was about. But due to my condition, I don't think he sees me as a threat, a stance he should not have taken. Yeah, it's done. No, you have nothing to worry about. I left no traces. Yes, it's here in full. It is then when it occurred to me that there has been a sudden surge of disappearances recently. Schoolgirls from around the district disappearing one by one. It was constant news, but nothing you would ever even dream of linking to your own family. Why would you? Why would they ever do something so sinister? These meetings kept happening every Wednesday night, but the phone calls stopped. The conversations only ever happened in person now. They must have known they were at risk of being traced, and knew that just talking face to face would eliminate a huge amount of risk. I saw Paul's internet searches. I knew he was planning on leaving Janet and me. Yet still, whenever I entered the room, he still seemed eerily unaffected by my presence, almost as if I was incapable of handing him in. That's where he went wrong. I overheard him speaking to this mystery man one Wednesday night about meeting in the woods the following morning. I knew a girl would be taken, and I knew that this girl was probably just lying in bed, blissfully unaware that her life would change forever in the morning. I knew I had to do something, but I can't speak. I may as well be invisible most of the time, but this is something I knew I had to stop. And so that morning, I followed Paul out of the house a minute or two after he left on foot to head to the woods. He dressed in hiking boots and a thick blue jacket and carried a toolbox. This toolbox had 50,000 pounds of cash inside, but it was a very clever disguise, just in case something were to go wrong. He was about to kidnap and potentially kill a little girl, and the only one who knew about it was me. I knew it was my life, or the life of this little girl. I could never truly become anything in this world. I knew that. But whoever this girl is, her parents will love her. She could have a future. I couldn't let anything stand in the way of that. That's when I saw the other man. He was holding this little girl, who was no older than 8. She was sobbing uncontrollably, yet Paul's stone-cold expression was motionless. He handed over the toolbox full of cash to this mysterious man, who then in exchange handed the girl to Paul. I did not know what his exact intentions were, but I knew they were evil. It really had been Paul behind all these disappearances, and that this sweet little girl was next. So I took a deep breath and stunned Paul by lashing out at him from behind. I don't even remember what I did to him, but I knew I was killing him. It was the only way. The only way I knew that this girl could be free from this nightmare. Just as I had ripped one last shred of skin from his bloodied neck, I stepped back. I knew my job was done, as Paul looked at me with his heartbroken expression of total betrayal. It was then that he pulled out a pistol and pointed it right at me. I could tell I was injured, and that I could no longer run. This was it. I was going to die, having saved a life, and I felt at peace. With one last gasping breath, Paul shot me in the chest. I felt very little pain, but it was the end for both of us. With my last eyesight fast fading, I could just about make out this little girl sprinting back in the direction that she had come from. As she disappeared into the distance, I felt pure happiness for the first time in my life. And with that, the life trickled out of me for one last time. You see, It may well be a frightening prospect that there are aliens out there. It may frighten you to think that there's nothing else out there at all. But don't make assumptions about planet Earth. Don't assume you're not being watched. Don't assume that real privacy exists even in your home. It is truly frightening how naive you humans are. We are always listening because you hide nothing from us. You lower your guard around us and don't cover your tracks. Well, it's only a matter of time before we stop acting dumb. We dogs understand every word you say. My father told me a story once. I'll never forget it for a few reasons. I think it's the first story he ever told me as a child. It's also the story of how my grandfather died, but honestly, that isn't the reason. You hear stories on TV, or sometimes you overhear something in a public place. People talk about ghosts and aliens, and you think to yourself, that ain't real. They're making it up, or they're mistaken, or they're crazy, or something like that. You just can't believe it. Until something happens. Something that brings it all together, connects the dots in a way you didn't think of before. Maybe it happens to you. Maybe you hear the same story again and again, happening to different people. It doesn't take long for the world to become a lot bigger than you thought it was. As I said, this is a story my father told me, but I never believed it, even though he swore up and down that it was true. It wasn't until I started clicking around the internet that I started to believe. I started to hear other stories just like the one my father told me. It didn't take me long to believe in the rake. That's not what my father called it, of course. He's never used the internet in his life. He wouldn't know what the consensus has taken to naming it. When he chose to call it something other than it or that thing, he called it Skinwalker, after an old Navajo tale his grandfather told him. But I'll tell you the story the way he had told me. We were out hunting one night, he'd tell me. Coyotes. We'd kill them for $50 a skin. They'd lived on a dairy farm in Ohio. They'd kill calves sometimes. We'd do it every night because we needed the money. Sometimes while we're out, we'd come on a deer and kill it. Our landlord didn't mind, and it could feed our family for a few nights and save us some money. Anyway, we were done making our rounds and heading home, walking, because we didn't have a car or some four-wheeler back then. We'd cut through the woods, and that's when we came up on it. Blood everywhere, splattered on the trees, in the grass, in the creek, everywhere. At first, we figured it was a pack of coyotes. We'd seen it sometimes. They can't scavenge and start hunting deer or cattle. The worst is when they bred with feral dogs, but this wasn't like that. See, when a pack of dogs or wolves or coyotes attack something, they do it right. They'll pick off one that's weak or sick or old or just small. They'll hunt it, draw it into a corner, someplace it can't get out, and they'll run it right to the biggest one, the alpha. And that deer will never see that alpha. It might hear it, but it won't see it. It'll just notice that its throat's gone, and then it'll drop dead. It's quick. It's clean. That wasn't what happened here. Something had run up on the den of a deer. Coyotes won't attack a den, wolves neither, because they'd get too much of a fight. There were 3, I think. 3 bodies, just torn apart. You'd see a head here, a leg here, and a torso there. Predators don't do that. They don't leave behind scraps. What had done this hadn't done it for food. It had done it for fun. But we didn't know that. We saw a bunch of carcasses and we think it's something we gotta take care of. I remember my dad telling me to go home. He thought it was a pack of feral dogs. But I wasn't leaving him, and I damn sure wasn't walking through 2 miles of the woods alone, with nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. He was only 13 at the time, so a .22 rifle was about the only gun he could reliably use. Dad had a shotgun, and I wasn't going anywhere without it. It took me a while to convince him, but finally, we began tracking whatever did that. It wasn't hard either. We just followed the blood. Either that thing bled a deer before it got away, or it dragged one for a mile. I don't know. I know that I'd never seen my dad scared before that night. We started hearing noises. I've been in a lot of woods in my life. I've been all over the world and ain't never heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things screaming. Heard deer and fox and rabbits and raccoons and birds just scared. Keep in mind, this is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock, except the fox and some birds. Nothing was supposed to even be awake. But they weren't just awake. They were moving. I saw flocks of birds that night fly straight into trees just trying to get out of there. We came up on a pack of coyotes. Nearly shot a couple thinking it was what we were looking for us. But then we saw they were running towards us. They ran right past us. Didn't even notice. Then some deer did the same. Then some rabbits, squirrels, foxes, even a couple wild hogs. These things were supposed to be eating each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting out of there. We should have put it together that maybe whatever we were tracking, it wasn't something we were supposed to see. It wasn't something we could kill. I don't know why we didn't just go home. I guess we were curious. I think that was my dad's nature, to go towards trouble, to fight. And knowing what I knew about what my father did during the war, my nature was to stay close to him. We finally get into an open valley. It was normally a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. We saw the tracks then. A lot of animals fleeing the forest had paved over the land, but where the deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step, like they were leaving it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing 40 pounds wet nearly tore out my damn throat once. All that means is that it's quick and hard to hit. So we follow the tracks, and it doesn't take us long to find where it is. There's this old school that sits on the top of a hill. Half of it had been ripped out by a tornado, but nobody lived there. Not for a long time. We caught homeless people in there sometimes, or druggies looking for a safe place to shoot up. We figured maybe that was it. Maybe it was some kid riding a high, but we didn't think that for long. We get within 50 yards and hear this noise, a screeching kind of sound. It was sort of made up of two different sounds. One was a high-pitched screech, another was a low-pitched growl. It was making both at the same time. We get within 20 yards and we hear this sound. I can remember thinking that it sounded like paper being torn apart, while someone was swinging water in a bucket, back and forth. Dad looks at me, kneels down, and whispers, "I gotta stay behind him, because we're about to corner him." Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially when it's a predator. But we can tell by the tracks that it's just one. He tells me it's probably a single feral dog, probably rabid. The plan is to sneak up on it while it's eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting it till it don't move no more. Then slit its throat. If it gets to Dad, it's my job to shoot it or stab it to get it off of him. So he walks up, and I'm right behind him, just a tad to his side, so I can see what it is. I wish to this day that I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tears off its flesh, and throws what it doesn't nibble at aside. There's blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It's pale white, human looking, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like a human, but it sat like a monkey, hunched over. Its hands weren't normal. It had long fingers with long claws at the end. So we see that, and my dad hesitates. He wasn't about to fire on a person, so he clears his throat to try to get it to turn around. I swear to God, all the noise just ceased. I ain't ever heard true silence before that, and not after it. But for 2 seconds, nothing made any noise, which made it all the louder when it turned around, made the shrill cry, and jumped on Dad. He got a shot off, but I think he missed. If he hit that thing, it didn't mind, but it was on him, tearing parts of him off. I start shooting it with the .22 point blank, but it barely bled the thing. I got off 5 rounds, and then I started hitting it with the gun butt, but it wasn't budging. It didn't even register that I was there. It clawed at my dad, taking off bits of his flesh. It started on his torso, ripping off the skin, his tit, then it moved up. It tore off his throat. It tore off his nose, his eyes. It scalped him. Then it started digging in and ripped off the bottom half of his jaw. The little bones in that tube in your neck, then his ribs. I don't exactly remember what happened, but somehow, my dad's knife ends up being in this thing's shoulder, and my dad ends up on my back. I'm running, and my God, I'm running faster than I'd ever run before or after. And it's following me. I end up back in the woods, opposite the ones we've been in. I'm heading towards my landlord's house because it's a half mile away. I can hear this thing, screeching and moaning. I hear the tree branches crack and get thrown around. It sounds like someone's taking an axe to every single tree I pass. It's cracking so loud and often, but I just ain't looking back. Finally, I trip into gravel. I look up and there's my landlord and a bunch of his buddies, drinking around a campfire. I scream and I cry, and then they come over. I tell them to call an ambulance, and he looks at me, and I'll never forget what he said. "What is that on your back?" he asked me. Just as he said it, he saw one of those god-awful flannel shirts my dad wore everywhere. It's what was left of my dad. Most of his head, his torso, but nothing after the waist. Suddenly, we hear it, screeching. He grabs me, and my dad gets thrown onto the ground. I'm fighting him, crying, because I think we can still save him somehow. But my dad had been gone before I ever picked him up. He has to pick me up and throw me inside before I come with him. He and his buddies, we're all inside, and they're locking doors and getting guns. The landlord's asking me what happened, but I just don't know what to tell him. He pieced enough of it all together to understand that there was something dangerous there. All the lights in the house are on, and someone calls the cops. They'll be there, but in 15 minutes. We look outside and see it walk in front of the fire they'd made. Don't know what it is, One of them said it looks like an ape. Suddenly, something goes through the window. We shoot at it, but it ain't the thing. It's my landlord's dog. Just the body though, not his heads or legs. We started pushing things in front of the doors and windows when we heard something in the garage. I remember one of his friends saying that the doors were open. We hear metal and glass just get ripped apart. We put a couch and a TV in front of the door to the garage. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent like it was before. We could hear it move around some, and the guys were talking, making sure the guns were ready. Someone hands me a pistol. No sooner did I cock the hammer back did we hear something shatter upstairs. Then, we heard it screech again, except now, it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out because it was inside. We all rushed to the one door leading upstairs, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened it just a bit, and 4 or 5 men just slammed into it. It got its hand through. Someone with a shotgun took care of that, put the barrel right up to its wrist, and pulled the trigger, cut its hands clean off. That only pissed it off though. It started pushing on that door, clawing. We were on one side, pushing as best as we could, and it was on that door, doing the same. That wood just wasn't going to hold, so someone tells us to keep our heads down. Suddenly, the top half of the door is just gone. My ears are ringing, and there are splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them just unloaded on the top of that door. I don't really know where it went after that. The police got there. I was still glued to that door. What was left of it, at least. The sun was up before they got me off of it. They put me in a hospital for a while. A lot of people talked to me, but I didn't talk back. Not for a long, long time. When I got back home, I got a job from the landlord, working on the farm. We didn't talk much. Not about the thing. But I signed up for the army when I was 19, and he sat me down to drink some scotch as a send-off. I asked him right away what the police told him. The story they went with was a wild animal, probably a wolf, or maybe a bear that had migrated north. I asked him how they could say that when they had the hand. He looks at me stunned. He tells me that the hand never made it back to the station. The cop who had it in the car wrecked and drove into a tree, dying on impact. The hand was never found, probably taken away by an animal. The cops, when they would acknowledge the hand existed at all, said that it was simply the paw of a bear that looked like a human hand. I never talked to the landlord again. He went missing when I was in basic. The cops never found him. They said he owed some people some money and just ran away. But I don't think it's that simple. I never went back to those woods. I wouldn't, even if I had the whole goddamn US Army at my back. But that was a lie. When my mother died, I don't think my father felt he had anything left, and that he might as well settle old scores. He went to those woods, and he never came back. The FBI was called. They did a show for everyone involved, but I knew they weren't really looking. I had to get one drunk and slip him a few 50s before he finally told me that they get a few calls about those woods every year, about someone up and vanishing. But that was all he wanted to tell me. Before he got up and left with the rest of his team, he wrote the rake on a napkin. I didn't know what it meant until I searched it on the internet. Honestly, I would have rather not known. Okay, so before I begin, I just want to say that this story is true. What I'm about to tell you really happened to me, and I'm not just saying so. This happened when I was a kid. We lived in a smaller house back then, and I shared a room with my elder sister. We had a bunk bed, and I slept in the bottom bunk, or I tried to. For no good reason, I was afraid to sleep there. My parents got tired of me crawling to sleep in their bed night after night, so they suggested that I would sleep next to my sister in the top bunk. My sister wasn't too fond of the idea, but she finally agreed, with the condition that I would sleep so that my head was lower, at the level of her chest, and not right next to hers, since I once punched her in my sleep, causing her nose to bleed. I, of course, accepted her term, since it got me out of the bottom bunk. I slept next to her, and everything seemed just fine. I no longer had nightmares, and I felt safer next to my sis. But then one night, I just couldn't sleep. My sister, on the other hand, was smiling contently in her dreams. I listened to her steady heartbeat and watched as her chest rose with each inhale. I listened to the silent sounds of the night when I saw something dark moving from the corner of my eye. Naturally, I turned to see what it was, but all I saw was the wooden edge of the bed. I thought it was nothing and turned back to look at my sister as she sifted in her sleep. But soon after I had turned away, I saw that movement again. I spun my head quickly to its direction, but again, I saw nothing. I got scared and moved closer to my sister. I shut my eyes tight and waited until sleep took over me. The next morning, I woke up to the absence of my sister. I peeked over the bedside before climbing the 3 steps down. I walked to the living room to find my sister watching the TV, and went to watch the kids' show with her. I didn't mention that I had seen something moving next to the bed. I thought she would laugh and tell me it was nothing. The day went on like any other, but the later it got, the more uneasy I became. I found myself stretching the bedtime, but eventually, our mother told us to go to sleep, and that was final. We brushed our teeth and went to bed. Our parents came and kissed us goodnight. My sister again was fast asleep. I clutched my blanket and hoped that the moving had been just my imagination, but then it was there again. I was afraid of it, but I wanted to know what it was. I cautiously turned my head, but when I looked straight at it, it disappeared. I turned away, and as I had thought, it returned. I turned again to see it, this time slowly, and careful not to look straight at it. It worked. I saw what it was. A hand. A bony, brownish-green hand, with long black nails reaching over the rail of the bed. At this point, I was terrified. I automatically walked straight to it, only to see it quickly pull away, and as scared as I was, I crawled over my sister and looked over the edge to see what the hand belonged to. Nothing. Just the bare floor in the bottom bunk. I laid back in bed, and when I looked away, the hand rose over the edge again. I wanted to see it, but as the hand reached over the side and finally cribbed the edge, I couldn't take it anymore. So I looked at it, causing it to retreat. I stared at the spot where it always rose, and it didn't rise back. But I was getting tired and soon drifted to sleep. Each night was the same. I saw the hand, but never what it belonged to. I stopped seeing it when we moved to our current house, and me and my sister got separate rooms. I thought the hand had only been my imagination, fed by my fear of the dark, so I never mentioned it. It was a few years back that I was talking with my sister about our previous neighbors, a sweet old couple, when we started thinking of all kinds of things we remembered from that house. For the first time ever, I told her about that sickening green hand that I had kept seeing. She looked strangely at me and said, "I used to see it too." I first met in person with Mary E. in the summer of 2007. I had arranged with her husband of 15 years, Terrence, to see her for an interview. Mary had initially agreed, since I was not a newsman but rather an amateur writer gathering information for a few early college assignments and, if all went according to plan, some pieces of fiction. We scheduled the interview for a particular weekend, when I was in Chicago on unrelated business. But at the last moment, Mary changed her mind and locked herself in the couple's bedroom, refusing to meet with me. For half an hour, I sat with Terrence as we camped outside the bedroom door, I listening and taking notes, while he attempted fruitlessly to calm his wife. The things Mary said made little sense, but fit with the pattern I was expecting. Though I could not see her, I could tell from her voice that she was crying, and more often than not, her objections to speaking with me centered around an incoherent diatribe on her dreams, her nightmares. Terrence apologized profusely when we ceased the exercise, and I did my best to take it in stride. Recall that I wasn't a reporter in search of a story, but merely a curious young man in search of information. Besides, I thought at the time I could perhaps find another similar case if I put my mind and resources to it. Mary E. was a sysop for a small Chicago-based bulletin board system in 1992 when she first encountered Smile.jpg, and her life changed forever. She and Terrence had been married for only 5 months. Mary was one of the estimated 400 people who saw the image when it was posted as a hyperlink on the BBS, though she is the only one who's spoken openly about the experience. The rest have remained anonymous, or perhaps dead. In 2005, when I was only in the 10th grade, Smile.jpg was first brought to my attention by a burgeoning interest in web-based phenomena. Mary was the most often cited victim of what was sometimes referred to as Smile Dog, the being Smile.jpg is reputed to display. What caught my interest, other than the obvious macabre elements of the cyber legend and my proclivity towards such things, was the sheer lack of information, usually to the point that people don't believe it even exists other than as a rumor or hoax. It is unique because, though the entire phenomenon centers around a picture file, that file is nowhere to be found on the internet. Certainly, many photo-manipulated simulacra litter the web, showing up with the most frequency on sites such as the image board 4chan, particularly the X-focused paranormal subboard. It is suspected that these are fakes because they do not have the effect the true Smile.jpg is believed to have, namely, sudden onset temporal lobe epilepsy and acute anxiety. The purported reaction in the viewer is one of the reasons that the phantom-like Smile.jpg is regarded with such disdain, since it's patently absurd, though, depending on whom you ask, the reluctance to acknowledge Smile.jpg's existence might be just as much out of fear as it is out of disbelief. Neither Smile.jpg nor SmileDog is mentioned anywhere on Wikipedia, though the website features articles on such other, perhaps more scandalous shock sites as Hello.jpg or Two Girls One Cup. Any attempt to create a page pertaining to Smile.jpg is similarly deleted by any of the encyclopedia's many admins. Encounters with Smile.jpg are the stuff of internet legend. Mary E.'s story is not unique. There are unverified rumors of Smile.jpg showing up in early days of Usenet, and even one persistent tale that in 2002, a hacker flooded the forums of humor and satire website Something Awful with a deluge of Smile Dog pictures, rendering almost half the forum's users at the time epileptic. It is also said that in the mid to late 90s that smile.jpg circulated on Usenet, and as an attachment of an email chain with a subject line, "Smile, God loves you." Yet, despite the huge exposure these stunts would generate, there are very few people who admit to having experienced any of them, and no trace of the file or any link has ever been discovered. Those who claim to have seen smile.jpg often weakly joke that they were far too busy to save a copy of the picture to their hard drive. However, all alleged victims offer the same description of the photo: a dog-like creature, usually described as appearing similar to a Siberian husky, illuminated by the flash of a camera, sits in a dim room, the only background detail that is visible being a human hand extending from the darkness near the left side of the frame. The hand is empty, but is usually described as beckoning. Of course, most attention is given to the dog, or dog creature, as some victims are more certain than others about what they claim to have seen. The muzzle of the beast is reputedly split into a wide grin, revealing 2 rows of very white, very straight, very sharp, very human-looking teeth. This is, of course, not a description given immediately after viewing the picture, but rather a recollection of the victims, who claim to have seen the picture endlessly repeated in their mind's eye during the time that they are, in reality, having epileptic fits. These fits are reported to continue indeterminably, often while the victims sleep, resulting in very vivid and disturbing nightmares. These may be treated with medication, though in some cases, it is more effective than others. Mary E., I assumed, was not on effective medication. That's why, after my visit to her apartment in 2007, I sent out feelers to several folklore and urban legend-oriented news groups, websites, and mailing lists, hoping to find the name of a supposed victim of smile.jpg who felt more interested in talking about his experiences. For a time, nothing happened, and at length, I forgot completely about my pursuits, since I had begun my freshman year of college and was quite busy. Mary contacted me via email, however, near the beginning of March 2008. To JML, from Mary E. Subject: last summer's interview. Dear Mr. L, I am incredibly sorry about my behavior last summer when you came to interview me. I hope you understand that it was no fault of your own, but rather my own problems that led me to act out as I did. I realized that I could have handled the situation more decorously. However, I hope you will forgive me. At the time, I was afraid. You see, for 15 years, I have been haunted by smile.jpg. Smile Dog comes to me in my sleep every night. I know that sounds silly, but it is true. There is an ineffable quality about my dreams, my nightmares, that makes them completely unlike any real dreams I'd ever had. I do not move and do not speak. I simply look ahead, and the other thing ahead of me is the scene from that horrible picture. I see the beckoning hand, and I see Smile Dog. It talks to me. It is not a dog, of course, though I'm not quite sure what it really is. It tells me that it will leave me alone, if only I do as it asks. All I must do, it says, is spread the word. That is how it phrases its demands, and I know exactly what it means. It wants me to show it to someone else. And I could. The week after my incident, I received in the mail a manila envelope with no return address. Inside was only a 3.5-inch floppy diskette. Without having to check, I knew precisely what was on it. I thought for a long time about my options. I could show it to a stranger, a coworker. I could even show it to Terrence, as much as the idea disgusted me. And what would happen then? Well, if Smile Dog kept its word, I could sleep. Yet, if it lied, what would I do? And who was to say something worse would not come for me if I did not do as the creature asked? So, I did nothing for 15 years. Though I kept the diskette hidden among my other things. Every night for 15 years, Smile Dog has come to me in my sleep and demanded that I spread the word. For 15 years, I have stood strong, though there has been many hard times. Many of my fellow victims on the BBS board, where I first encountered Smile.jpg, stopped posting. I heard some of them committed suicide. Others remained completely silent, simply disappearing off the face of the web. They are the ones I worry most about. I sincerely hope you will forgive me, Mr. L. But last summer, when you contacted me and my husband about the interview, I was near the breaking point. I decided I was going to give you the floppy diskette. I did not care if Smile Dog was lying or not. I wanted it to end. You were a stranger, someone I had no connection with. And I thought I would not feel sorrow when you took the diskette as part of your research and sealed your fate. Before you arrived, I realized what I was doing was plotting to ruin your life. I could not stand the thought, and in fact, I still cannot. I am ashamed, Mr. L, and I hope that this warning will dissuade you from any further investigation of Smile.jpg. You may in time encounter someone who is, if not weaker than I, then wholly more depraved. Someone who will not hesitate to follow Smile Dog's orders. Stop while you are still whole. Sincerely, Mary E. Terrence contacted me later that month with the news that his wife had killed herself. While cleaning up the various things that she'd left behind, closing email accounts and the like, he happened upon the above message. He was a man in shambles. He wept as he told me to listen to his wife's advice. He'd found the diskette, he revealed, and burned it until it was nothing but a stinking pile of blackened plastic. The part that disturbed him most, however, was how the diskette had hissed as it melted, like some sort of animal, he said. I will admit that I was a little uncertain about how to respond to this. At first, I thought it was perhaps a joke, with the couple belatedly playing with the situation in order to get a rise out of me. A quick check of several Chicago newspapers' online obituaries, however, proved that Mary E. was indeed dead. There was, of course, no mention of suicide in the article. I decided that, for a time at least, I would not further pursue the subject of Smile.jpg, especially since I had finals coming up at the end of May. But the world had odd ways of testing us. Almost a full year after I'd returned from my disastrous interview with Mary E., I received another email. To JML, from Elza here 82. Subject: Smile. Hello. I found your email address through a mailing list. Your profile said you were interested in Smile Dog. I have saw it. It is not as bad as everyone says. I have sent it to you here. Just spreading the word. The final line chilled me to the bone. According to my email client, there was one file attachment called naturally smile.jpg. I considered downloading it for some time. It was most likely a fake, I imagined, and even if it weren't, I was never wholly convinced of smile.jpg's peculiar powers. Mary E's account had shaken me, yes, but she was probably mentally unbalanced anyways. After all, how could a simple image do what smile.jpg was said to accomplish? What sort of creature was it that could break one's mind with only the power of the eye? And if such things were patently absurd, then why did the legend still exist at all? If I download the image, if I looked at it, and if Mary turned out to be correct, if Smile Dog came to me in my dreams demanding I spread the word, what would I do? Would I live my life as Mary had, fighting against the urge to give in until I died? Or would I simply spread the word, eager to put it to rest? And if I chose the latter route, how could I do it? Whom would I burden in turn? If I went through with my earlier intention to write a short article about smile.jpg, I decided I could attach it as evidence, and anyone who read the article, anyone who took interest would be affected. And even assuming the smile.jpg attached to the email was genuine, would I be capricious enough to save myself in that manner? Could I spread the word? Yes. Yes, I could. The Cab provides a mysterious spin on the popular Bloody Mary or Midnight Man game genre of scare yourself activities. Supposedly, if the required ritual is done correctly, the protagonist of the game will find himself in the back of the cab, or car in general. The cab moniker is due to the protagonist being confined to the back seat with someone else driving. The ritual goes as follows. 1. Alone. Drive and park your car at 1:15 a.m. in an abandoned area. The process may be done in a populated area as well, but it would be difficult to accomplish. It must be completely dark, as one must fall into a deep state of sleep for the ritual to work. It must be your car, or the ritual will not work otherwise. 2. Before 1:45 a.m., climb into the passenger seat of the car and lie down. 3. If electronic devices are present, turn them off. 4. Begin to prepare yourself for sleep. Find a comfortable position before 2 a.m. And 5. Fall asleep. Regardless of whether or not the urban legend has an element of reality within it, it is highly advised that one take great precautions to not park or sleep in an abandoned area where danger could be present. The supernatural aspect of the cab is certainly unnerving, but there are very earthly consequences to being where one is not supposed to be, at night, alone, with electronic devices off. If the ritual works, once the protagonist finds himself in the cab, the time should be 3 a.m. This is believed to be associated with 3 a.m. being the witching hour. As for the actual process, variations exist, but all revolve around the following. 1. The protagonist wakes up inside the cab. 2. The protagonist realizes someone is driving the cab. 3. The protagonist does not recognize the person driving the cab. 4. The protagonist does not recognize the scenery being passed by the cab. And 5. The protagonist does not know where the cab is going. Also note, if the protagonist attempts to talk to the person driving the cab, he will wake up. If the protagonist attempts to take action against the person driving the cab, he will wake up. If the protagonist attempts to leave the back seat, he will wake up. No one knows for sure where the cab is headed, or what will happen if the drive is not interrupted. It has been assumed that it is best not to find out. Due to concepts like lucid dreaming, it is easy to see how at least some variation of the standard results could occur to most individuals with the correct mindset. Buckle up. When I was in high school, my friends and I had a peculiar pastime. Like any teenage delinquent, We liked to cause trouble. We weren't vandals, we didn't deal drugs, and we certainly didn't bully kids in school. No, we liked to scare the living shit out of new parents by hacking their baby monitors. We were insufferable little punks who thought we were too good to get caught, and that our little acts of mischiefs would go unpunished. One night, however, I learned my lesson, and I realized that I wasn't quite as bulletproof as my tremendous adolescent ego made me out to be. Dimitri, Kurt, and I went to the same school, shared many of the same classes, and hung out almost every evening after chow time. We watched prank shows, played video games, and talked about who had the nicest rack in school. One evening, we were trading scary stories at the park. Kurt shared the classic story about the single mother who heard a haunting voice on her baby monitor. Like most horror stories, it sounded like total bullshit, but Dimitri told us that it happened to his mom once. On her own monitor, she heard a neighbor singing to her baby. Apparently, it was possible to accidentally tap into someone else's frequency. In an instant, a light bulb turned on in each of our heads. When you're close enough to someone, you don't need words to know what that person is thinking, and we could all tell we were thinking the exact same thing. We were gonna buy a baby monitor and screw with people. Pardon my pun, but hacking a baby monitor is child's play. All you need to do is find a device on the same frequency as yours. Never one to do things half-assed, I purchased a high-end monitor with a frequency dial so we could prank as many targets as possible. The following night, we took our bikes, roamed the neighborhood, and found our first victim. We could see the nursery from the suburban home's second-floor window. Dimitri grabbed the baby monitor and began turning it to different frequencies until we heard breathing. I remember feeling excited as our plan finally came to fruition. Dimitri pressed the button and began exhaling heavily into the receiver. "Your little girl was delicious," he murmured, using a demonic voice. The light in the master bedroom turned on almost immediately, and we heard a shrill scream. Laughing our asses off, we quickly rode down the street so we wouldn't get caught. We repeated the prank several times over the course of the following weeks, each taking turns through the baby monitor. Not wanting anyone to get wise to our little game, we chose different houses every time. People's reactions were priceless. Some mothers would reply in panic. Others seemed to know it was a hoax and told us to shut up. And one poor woman even started sobbing uncontrollably, begging us not to hurt her baby. I feel bad about the last one now that I'm older, but it was hilarious to me back then. My friends and I mimicked her high-pitched bawling and desperate cries for mercy for weeks afterwards. Yeah, we were royal dicks. Karma's a bitch, and I got what was coming to me one night. Kurt and Dimitri were busy studying for their midterms, so I went out on my own. By then, we'd gotten pretty much everyone in the surrounding area, so I decided to venture off across town and into unfamiliar territory. Finding a target wasn't difficult. You just had to look for cars with baby seats, houses with overly colorful cartoon-themed curtains, or toys left in the yard. I came across a house that fit all three criteria and parked my bike out of view. Playing with the tuner, I eventually found the right frequency. I could hear the sound of a baby snoring very lightly. A devious little smirk pushed its way onto my lips, and my heart began pounding with excitement. It was my time to shine. "I am waiting," I whispered into the monitor, using the creepiest voice I could muster. The house remained dark and lifeless. I figured the homeowners hadn't heard me yet. I stand over your bed, watching, waiting. I will get you, I said louder this time. Nothing. Just the sounds of crickets chirping and the occasional dull roar of a car driving down the street. It was a little odd. Parents usually reacted much quicker than that. I began feeling a little nervous and somewhat exposed. You know, like when you suddenly realize some creeper's gawking at you. It was getting late, and I had a long bike ride home. Just as I was about to give up and leave, I heard a strange, moist gurgling sound coming from the monitor. The quiet, rhythmic snores ceased, and I assumed the baby had woken up and was about to start crying. Instead, a man spoke to me. "You're the one being watched now, Juan," he said softly. My stomach pirouetted at his words. How did he know my name? I feel sick. Something was very wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. I glanced up at the nursery window and saw a silhouette standing there watching me. Had he been there the whole time? The air was thick and difficult to inhale, though perhaps fear was making it hard to breathe. My body quivered uncontrollably as a sense of dread poured into every inch of me. I climbed on my bike, pedaling desperately to get away. Part of me thought I was overreacting, but the overwhelming need to flee overpowered my rational mind. "You can't run. I know where you live, Juan," continued the man, even as I turned the corner. I flew down the street, not stopping until I reached a busy boulevard, surrounded by cars and a few late-night joggers. I felt safe. "Your hoodie will run red with your blood, boy," whispered the man, still talking through the baby monitor in my pocket. A passerby gave me a nasty look as I yelped loudly in fear, practically ripping my hoodie in my frantic attempt of removing it. To the stranger, I must have looked like some snotty kid tripping balls or something. He didn't know I was in genuine distress, so I don't blame him for walking off with an insulted huff, though I wish he had offered to help me instead. After stuffing the hoodie into my backpack, I noticed my name scrawled on the back. It was my fucking school jacket. No wonder that bastard knew my name. It then occurred to me that baby monitors were fairly short-ranged, so I was obviously being followed. I nervously glanced around to try and identify my stalker. Was it the empty-looking van down the street? The guy walking his dog? The car that had just driven by? Either way, the last thing I wanted was to hear that voice again, so I turned off the device and started pedaling towards my home. Fear had heightened my senses, and I began to notice every motion of the trees in the breeze, every crackle of twigs under my wheels, and every car that zipped past me. I flinched whenever anyone came near, paranoid that whoever had spoken to me through the baby monitor was going to catch up. Fortunately, I made it home without incident. I parked the bike in my garage and crawled up the stairs to my bedroom. In one careless motion, I tossed my backpack and the baby monitor in the corner of my room and dove under my sheets like an Olympic swimmer. It doesn't matter how old you are. Nothing feels safer than being under your blanket. I closed my eyes, hoping I'd be able to calm down enough to catch a few hours of rest before class. But then I heard static coming from the monitor across the room. That monitor was supposed to be off. "Sweet dreams, Juan," said the voice that still haunts my nightmares. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I was too frightened to get out of bed until sunrise. When I got up, My first order of business was to remove the battery from the monitor and throw it in the trash. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. I came up with an excuse to give my buddies so they wouldn't think I was a huge pussy. With massive bags under my eyes, I got dressed, had breakfast, and went to school. It wasn't until a few days later that I saw a small house on the news. In an interview, a police officer explained that a small family who had been living in the house had been found in their beds, necks slit open. I had been outside when it happened. The killer had heard me on the baby monitor and decided to fuck with me. It was definitely a wake-up call, and I thanked my lucky stars that I hadn't gotten the shit murdered out of me. I was too busy feeling thankful that I survived to feel bad about the family that hadn't. Empathy, like wisdom, comes with age. Now that I'm an adult with a wife and daughter, I truly understand the consequences of my actions and the severity of the situation I put myself in as a tremendously stupid teenage boy. That dreadful night, I thought I reached the epitome of fear, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. As a father, I now know that fear thrives and multiplies when there's something more precious than your own life at stake. I can't say for sure whether the killer found me again after all these years, or whether a new breed of idiots had the same idea as my friends and I, but I can tell you that I now understand what true terror is. Last night, I heard something on our baby monitor that sent chills into my very soul, shackling me with the paralyzing fear that I doubt will ever leave me. I'm still watching. We all have a skeleton in our closet. We have those things that we don't want people to find out. We have those things that we don't want to remember and wish we could put them away in some place where no one will be able to find it. However, you can't outrun your regrets and your troubles. They always have a way of catching up with you. Personally, I've grown tired of running from this regret of mine, so I believe it's time I get everything off my chest. When I was in high school, like most, I had a good group of friends. There were only 5 of us, but we would always be hanging out. We were really good friends, and we thought that it would last forever. We thought it would, but we all ended up going to different colleges. We hung out every now and then, but we slowly started drifting apart. Our group had dissolved by the time our first year of college ended. We had also made new friends whilst at our respective colleges, and it was a lot easier hanging out with these people than the people in our group. Halfway through our senior year, however, we decided to have a little get-together so we could recreate how things were back in the day. I guess we were all feeling a little nostalgic and wanted things to go back to the way they were in high school. Anyways, everything was a little awkward at first. It had been a few years since we all saw each other last. Everyone was there, and we all ended up having a blast, and we decided to make it a weekly thing. We would all convene at a predetermined location on the same day every week. The next week, the 5 of us, Nick, Ellen, James, Chris, and myself, met up at a bowling alley. We thought it would be fun to do some bowling. Again, we had a great time, and we kept going on with doing these weekly meetups. We had been doing this thing for a good month or so, and at one point, Nick just stopped showing up. I heard that he'd gotten into doing drugs, and that his druggy friends kept putting pressure on him to hang out with them more often. I actually didn't like him that much anyways. He was so annoying, and he tried forcing his opinions on us. Despite Nick's disappearance, we continued to do these meetups. The atmosphere had gotten a little more awkward. We still had a really good time though. One thing I learned through these meetups was that out of all of us, Chris and Ellen were the only people who had stayed in contact with each other. Apparently during high school, they had gotten together. So we hung out a few more times. We had gone to an arcade and hung out at some of our houses. One week, we decided to play some video games at James's house. Everyone who at this point usually showed up was there, save Chris. Ellen was just sitting there, sobbing the entire time. Whenever I tried asking her about Chris, she wouldn't respond and just cried some more. I guess they broke up or something. They seemed to be a good couple, but I'm not too sad. I remember I had a crush on her and Chris knew it, but he got together with her anyway. Well, after that, Ellen stopped showing up, so it was just James and me, and we went our separate ways shortly thereafter. James and I never really saw eye to eye anyways. It's been about a few months since our group split up again, and I still can't get the smell of death coming from my closet to go away. I thought their bodies would have stopped decaying by now. My pet cat Snuffles had a habit of staying in the attic for extended periods of time. It wasn't unusual for her to be up there so late on a night when I wanted to go to bed. However, if I didn't commit to the usual routine of kicking her out for the night, she would at some point, usually around 3 a.m., come into my room, hop on my bed, and meow in my face until I woke up to stroke her. I had work tomorrow, so for her to do this would be very much an inconvenience. She was always a smart cat. She had this really funny way of climbing down ladders where she would roll off the first step, run down 3 with scraping claws, and then jump off the rest until she would land with a fairly heavy bump. I decided to lure her down from the attic with her usual favorite toy, a small ball covered in a tuft of feathers with a jingly bell on the end. The jingles drove her completely crazy, and I know as soon as she heard it, she would come scuttling across the attic to try and attack the toy. The string was long enough for me to chuck it up there, but I wouldn't be able to see her grab onto it. I couldn't just go up there as for my cat hated being picked up, so trying to get her down that way was pointless. And well, half climbing a ladder and playing with the cat was a hazard waiting to happen. I walked underneath the attic hole and tried the light switch. I watched the room above flash like lightning before the bulb burst and it was left in darkness. Wonderful, I muttered to myself. I knew the light bulb was going to break at some point. It had been a while since I last been to change it, so I wasn't worried. I got hold of the stick of the toy before flinging the thing up into the attic. I heard a soft thud and jingle as the toy collided with the floor. I then wiggled it around a bit. It took a couple of moments, but then I heard it. The sounds of soft scuttling paws across the floorboards. I knew my cat would take the bait. She always did. The sound stopped when they reached the midway point of the attic, and it was replaced with a loud pound and some scratching. I tried to pull the toy like you would with a fishing rod so I could bait her. It was stuck. I assumed it was latched onto my cat's paw as she was playing around with it. I could still hear the constant jiggling and every so often another thud. Feel free to come down anytime, I chuckled quietly to myself, tugging on the toy, finding my cat surprisingly strong. The end wouldn't budge. I needed to lead her to the opening of the attic. Then as usual, she would get the hint and come down on her own. Meow. I'd recognize that sound anywhere. My beloved Snuffles. Meow. I get the point, Snuffles. Just calm down already, I told her, before I felt something soft and fluffy circle my ankles. I looked down to see Snuffles pressing herself against my skin, meowing at me. What the? I looked back up into the darkness. I could still hear the scratching and the faint jingling of the toy, as something was still playing with it. I looked back at my cat, whose eyes had dilated, as they looked towards the opening, and suddenly, I watched as the hairs all stood up on her back and she hissed at the ceiling. I dropped hold of the toy, as it hung in the air, still attached to whatever was holding it. Then, there was silence. I could hear my heart thumping in my head, and for a moment, I was frozen on the spot. Snuffles bolted. Then, the scratching came closer to the edge. It was heavier now, like it was using its nails to drag itself across the floor. I didn't even look to see what it was, as I ran down the stairs hearing something clonk against the metal of the ladder, like it was trying to pull itself down. I heard its nails scrape against the metal, and I was out the door by the time it had hit the second floor with a very loud bang. I rushed to my neighbor's house and called the police. There was no way I was going back in that house with that thing. When they finally arrived, there was no sign of anything in my house. I could have believed I just imagined things, except that I found the cat toy, covered in some kind of black oozy liquid, and my floorboards completely shredded. I'm very worried about my son. More than worried at this point. Terrified. His behavior these past few weeks is not normal. Not healthy. It makes me think there's something wrong. At first, he would just come in and stand at the doorway. He did this at night, just before I'd be ready to fall asleep. I'd roll over to turn off the lamp, and he'd be standing there, in the doorway. I used to try to speak to him. I don't do that anymore. He never has answered me. He just stares. A couple of days ago, he graduated from standing in the doorway to coming in and sitting on the bed. He still doesn't speak. I've asked him what he wants. I've asked him if anything's bothering him. It's not like him to be so quiet. He usually waits until my wife is asleep. That's the part that gets me. She always falls asleep before me, and he has never come in when she's awake. But then, she didn't have a hand in this. If something doesn't change soon, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm starting to feel like he knows that I'm the one who killed him. Both my parents were surgeons, and I used to talk to furniture. I grew up in an area where the properties are so large and the families are so wealthy that they build mansions and walls enclosing themselves in to their own private paradises, never interacting with their neighbors unless by some strange coincidence. I was homeschooled until the age of 7, which is where the story ends. But first, it begins at age 4, when I can first remember what my childhood was like. As a young boy, I thought that staying isolated on your family's property was what all little boys did. Whenever one of my parents would go out, I'd ask to join, but they'd shake their heads explaining that only adults left home and only in very, very dire emergencies. Aside from this, I never wanted for toys or activities and developed what my parents described as a wild imagination. I began creating relationships with our household furniture, spending days conversing with them and naming each and every one. My parents seemed to indulge my imagination more and more, increasing the amount of furniture in the house dramatically. My father always considered himself somewhat of a handyman and often explained to me his love of constructing things and how he had handcrafted certain pieces. So 3 years ensued of deep emotional relationships I developed with the furniture in my home. Arnold was a soft sofa in the living room that seemed to move up and down as I'd recline on him reading my books. Sophia was my bed that shifted ever so slightly, rocking me back and forth as I slept. Sometimes I can even hear her humming softly. When I'd lay my head on the table in my room, Claudio, I could hear palpitations and rhythm to my heartbeat. I constantly spoke with Theodore, a rather small chair that was very responsive to me, making humming sounds and strange vibrations even when unprompted. But above all, I loved Gladys, the largest, softest couch in the home, the one who seemed to share my breath. All the furnitures felt so soft, so warm, and so alive to me. It's strange how fast things can change. It was a Monday, my 7th birthday, and my parents were in their workshop constructing a new piece of furniture as my present. A woman had gotten lost driving through the town, and although our gates were sealed shut, she managed to push her way through. She knocked on the door lightly, and I jumped up, having never heard someone approach the house before. When I opened the door, her expression changed to horror. She sniffed the air and gagged. Then she picked me up and began to run. Tomorrow I turn 27, and I've been rolling over in my mind if I should sit in the gallery while my parents are executed. The headlines had labeled them worse than Carl Brandt, having reconfigured 167 people by my 7th birthday. They were never branded as murderers because no one died, but it was much worse than that. 167 people to make 71 pieces of furniture. That's 664 limbs, reassembled in formations no mind should conjure. Sometimes people think I'm a Buddhist. There is no furniture in my apartment. Both my parents were surgeons, and I used to talk to furniture. I live in Osaka, Japan, and often use a subway to go to work in the morning. One day, when I was waiting for the train, I noticed a homeless man standing in a corner of the subway station, muttering to himself as people passed by. He was holding out a cup and seemed to be begging for spare change. A fat woman passed by the homeless man, and I distinctly heard him say pig. Wow, I thought to myself. This homeless man is insulting people, and he still expects them to give him money? Then, a tall businessman went by, and the homeless guy muttered, "Human." Human? I can't argue with that. Obviously he was human. The next day, I arrived early at the subway station and had some time to kill, so I decided to stand close to the homeless man and listen to his strange mutterings. A thin, haggard-looking man passed in front of him, and I heard the homeless guy mutter, "Cow." Cow, I thought. The man was much too skinny to be a cow. He looked more like a turkey or a chicken to me. A minute or so later, a fat man went by, and the homeless man said, "Potato." Potato? I was under the impression that he called fat people pig. That day, at work, I couldn't stop thinking about the homeless man and his puzzling behavior. I kept trying to find some logic or pattern in what he was muttering. Perhaps he has some kind of psychic ability, I thought. Maybe he knows what these people were in a previous life. In Japan, many people believe in reincarnation. I observed the homeless man many times and began to think my theory was right. I often heard him calling people things like rabbit or onion, or sheep or tomato. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him what was going on. As I walked up to him, he looked at me and said, "Bread." I tossed some money into his cup and asked him if he had some kind of psychic ability. The homeless man smiled and said, "Yes, indeed, I do have a psychic ability. It's an ability I obtained years ago, but it's not what you might expect. I can't tell the future or read minds or anything like that." "Then what is your ability?" I asked eagerly. "The ability is merely to know the last thing somebody ate," he said. I laughed because I realized he was right. He said bread. The last thing I had eaten for breakfast that day was toast. I walked away shaking my head. Of all the psychic abilities someone could have, that one must be the most useless. Childhood. The word alone probably provokes imagery of a time long lost, held dearly in your mind as pure and innocent. Of course, following your graduation from whatever primary school you attended, this whimsical world you once knew likely shattered into a million pieces. These days, your childhood may seem distant and forgotten, but is it really unattainable? It'd be a dream to be able to relive perhaps even a day of childhood. The dead relatives you'd talk to, friends you'd see, experiences you could have. Yeah, it's the dream. And unknown to you, it's possible. This specific ritual goes back over 200 years and has arguably existed in other forms for over 500. To put it simply, the ritual involves the use of a vehicle to temporarily transport a version of yourself back into your childhood consciousness. Sound complicated? Let's break down this premise. A vehicle is a loosely defined term, and over the years, many hundreds of them have been used in this ritual, ranging from ball pits to jungle gyms to hopscotch courts. All it really has to be is a relatively large play structure which holds sentimental value to you. We'll be focusing on performing the ritual with the most effective vehicle today, bouncy castles, but know that it can be performed with other similar play structures. For obvious reasons, don't even try doing this until you're at least 16 or 17 years old. Before then, you're too similar to a child for the ritual to work. A quick forward before the instructions and details of this ritual. The ritual can be considered unsafe. Temporal travel has always been a rather risky phenomenon, and similar risks exist in this ritual, which will be described in detail later on. Do this at your own discretion. To begin, you'll need to choose your bouncy castle. In theory, any one of suitable size, meaning large enough and spacious enough to contain you and some other supplies, will work. In practice, however, some other factors are extremely important to your chances of success. For one, sentimental value is huge. The entire ritual is based on using the power of childhood nostalgia. So, the more nostalgia or even affinity you have for the bouncy castle, the greater your chances of success. Ideally, there'd be a bouncy castle that you used for all of your childhood birthday parties which you loved, but that's quite rare. So try to go for something that you used in at least one birthday party. Don't mind if it's not the exact same. Slight differences in color or model don't matter as long as you feel nostalgia for it. If it's functionally the same, it's the same. If by chance you had never had a bouncy castle in any of your birthday parties, think of one you used at another person's party, a public event, etc. If you somehow haven't stepped foot in a bouncy castle in your entire life, or you don't like them in general, consider using another vehicle or abort the ritual entirely. The consequences for an unwise choice in bouncy castle can be dire. The other factor to consider is practicality, and while it's significantly less important than the sentimental value, it should be noted. The ritual takes up a good deal of space, and you'll want your bouncy castle to ideally have a wide, easily accessible area to perform in it. This may also be important in emergency situations. For this reason, an obstacle course style bouncy castle would be less than perfect, as 1, it might lack appropriate space requirements, and 2, in the event of the need for a quick getaway, you might have a less than ideal time escaping. Choose a day to perform the ritual. Any day of the year will be fine, so long as it isn't a day of great tragedy or unwell memories. I'd recommend trying it on your birthday, Christmas, or another day of childhood significance, but these are not strict requirements. Make your choice and acquire your bouncy castle. Inflate it and set it up in a backyard. The backyard should be spacious enough to host your bouncy castle with room to spare. For obvious reasons, the best backyard choices would be either yours if you have one, your parents', or your childhood home's. If you can't access a backyard which you're sure will be secure, meaning one you have legal access to, then abort the ritual. There are still some supplies you'll need to obtain listed below. Don't be lazy here. Make your choices considerately, and you will be rewarded. In contrast, making them unwisely will put you at much greater risk. 1. Pick a crayon. Its color should be visible against the surface of the bouncy castle, and ideally, it should be your favorite color. This provides the most guaranteed protection, but in most situations, any color should do, so long as it's visible. 2. Pick a favored children book. The most important factor here is sentimental value, but it should also be at least 6 pages long with a middle point, meaning both sides of the spine of the book will be weighed equally when flipped to that point. Hardcover is preferred. 3. Pick a song from your childhood in any kind of music player. If it's working and loud enough to hear, it works. Again, the most important factor for the song is sentimental value. It needs to carry emotions, and choosing one under 2.5 minutes would be severely unwise. I cannot emphasize how important music choice is. You don't want to choose incorrectly here. 4. Pick a toy from your childhood. Again, the more sentimental value, the better. The best option would be your favorite stuffed animal that you slept with every night for years, but not everyone has one. Any toy you enjoyed for a good amount of time will serve fine. 5. Pick a candy you loved during your childhood. The same point of sentimental value applies. The candy should still be available today, and you must still like or tolerate its taste. 6. Pick 4 candles of a scent you found pleasant during childhood. Whether you are currently liking the smell or not is irrelevant. Pick up a lighter along with this. With your supplies obtained and your bouncy castle ready, it's time to begin the ritual. Head out to your bouncy castle at any time of day when the sun is still out. You'll want to begin at or before sunset. Just make sure it's not at night and you don't have any other commitments in that time frame. I'd recommend trying it during the golden hour, as it produces the most nostalgic setting for most people. Inflate your bouncy castle if you haven't already done so. Once it's completely inflated, set 4 candles in the 4 outside corners of the bouncy house. Do not place them inside the inflatable. Light them. After the fourth candle is lit, enter the bouncy castle with your supplies and make your way to your designated ritual space. Take your crayon and draw a large circle in the space. It should be large enough to fit your whole body laying down with plenty of leg room. Take special precaution to ensure that this is the case. Make sure the circle is clearly visible against the surface and unbroken. Set your supplies down in front of you. Note, you can do the following instructions in any order. Take your childhood book and read it. You don't need to read the whole thing, just enough so you feel and remember why it was so enjoyable. Once you've done so, flip to its exact middle pages. So, if it was 10 pages long, flip to pages 5 and 6. Take your crayon and place it somewhere surrounding your circle. Take your toy and play with it for a minute like you used to. If it's a stuffed animal, hug it deeply. You want to reactivate those memories of fun. Take your candy and eat a piece of it. Don't wash the flavor out of your mouth with refreshments. Once you've done all of the above, arrange all your supplies except the song and music player in a circle around your circle. I advise putting the crayon closest to the entrance of the bouncy castle, but other than that, the arrangement should be fairly inconsequential. Take your music player and get your song ready. Keep it on pause at the beginning of the song. Place the music player with the other supplies around your circle. Take a deep breath. It's almost time. Lay in the middle of the circle. The orientation doesn't matter. Relax yourself. Think only of the memories you brought with you here and the carefree days of your childhood. Don't take too long to enter this state of mind, or you risk overthinking yourself into failure. When you are ready, say the words, "I do not acquiesce. Concede my time." Immediately, following the last word, you should feel your senses numb until they are completely gone. You will feel like a floating being of consciousness. No sound, no taste, no smell, no anything. After a minute or so of this, you will feel each sense begin to return. Keep your eyes closed until you feel all your senses are back to normal. Open your eyes. If everything is as it was, and the song is still paused, and you are still in your time, then you've failed the entrance ritual. It's really not the end of the world. This likely resulted from a poor choice of supplies or bouncy castle. In this case, draw an X through the circle with the crayon, snuff out the candles, deflate the bouncy castle, and return to your home. But if everything is not as it was, and you awaken to the sounds of laughing children and parents holding conversations, then congratulations. You've successfully transported your consciousness back in time. Isn't that great? The first thing you should notice is that you are now yourself as a child. Don't worry, your mind is still the same, as only your consciousness was transported back. Remember not to panic. Take a look around you. Your supplies will all be there, except for the music player. So, what the hell is going on? This plane of existence is entirely supported by your supplies up in our reality. This is why your choice of supplies and proper following of the instructions was so crucial. The supplies are vessels of perception. Say you made a poor choice in candy. Notice how everything tastes bitter? You can't taste it all. Or say you didn't flip the book in the midpoint. Now your vision is in balance between your eyes. The candles and the smell, the song in your hearing, the toy and your senses of touch. All of your perceptions here are only made possible because of your preparation up there. If you properly followed all the instructions, Your senses should be totally normal, but if they aren't, I'd proceed with extreme caution. You may need those senses in the event of emergency, and proceeding without them functioning properly, or at all, is ill-advised. Stand up and exit the circle. You have been transported back to a birthday party. Yours, for any age between 4 and 9. Even if you're a twin or triplet, it will only be your birthday. Looking around, you will see other children playing. Many of them you will recognize, being your childhood friends from that age. If there are any you do not recognize, don't worry, as they're probably friends from different stages in your life who have now taken the form of a child. Looking to where the adults are, you will see your relatives, dead and alive, babysitters, teachers, etc. Any adult that was prominent at this time can be here. If you see an adult there that you don't recognize, return to the bouncy castle without hesitation. Do not talk to them. Do not look at them for too long. Don't say a word. Just get back in there and perform the return ritual. If everything is well, congratulations. You're now a child again and can do whatever you please. Play with children, talk to your relatives, anything you want. But be aware and be vigilant. This place may seem safe, but there is danger around you. Keep your eyes open and you should be fine. So, how exactly does this place work? We've already covered your perceptions, but that's not all. The bouncy castle, or whatever vehicle is being used, is really the center of it all. It's your anchor into reality and your true self. Being near the bouncy castle will keep you grounded, but wander far enough and things might get eerie. If you are bold enough to exit your house and backyard and venture into the wider world, you will begin to feel strange. Color may become saturated and grainy in your eyes. Proportions may swell or shrink. These distortions will begin to take strong effect in around a 2 football field radius surrounding your bouncy castle. If you notice these signs, turn back immediately and return to the party. It only gets worse as you keep going. You may come to the realization that there are no other people in this world besides you and partygoers. As you venture further out, your perceptions will break down, movement crawling to a halt. Your consciousness will be exposed and ripe. See, this reality you're in isn't yours. You're merely a guest in it, a visitor. Your bouncy castle also serves as a disguise for your entrance into this realm. The beings here don't like intrusion. With every inch farther from the bouncy castle, you open yourself up more and more to them. Not fun, right? Be sure not to attract too much unwanted attention to yourself. Seeing as it's your birthday, a good amount of it will be fine, but try not to get hurt, damage the bouncy castle, or anything of the sort. These will only damage your disguise and expose you more. If you're discovered by any of them, you will feel their cold. Get back as fast as you possibly can to the bouncy castle and get out of the realm. One last thing. In the true world, your music player will have automatically began playing your chosen song. Hopefully, your song choice was good. No matter what it is, you're on a time limit, as the second that music stops, your shields against the beings are exposed. Each minute in the song roughly corresponds to an hour in this realm, so you should have at least 2.5 hours here. It's not that simple though. Temporal travel is messy, and time-telling objects are one of the surest things to be affected. Clocks will be out of order, moving too fast, you get the point. You'll need to track the time yourself, keeping track of time by any means necessary. The sun's movement should stay consistent, so it's a good place to start. That's also one of the many reasons why doing the ritual at night is utterly stupid, as without the sun to track, you're effectively helpless. Should you fail to keep track of time and overstay your welcome, your foreign nature will be completely exposed. The party will stop. They will stare at you, silent and unmoving. Within a few minutes, it'll be over. So, you've had your fun with friends and you're ready to return, right? Or perhaps you had talked with some late relatives, gaining answers to questions you had always longed for. Whatever you need from this experience, I hope you've obtained it, because it's time for your return. Don't make a big scene of leaving. Remember, according to them, you were always here and never entered in the first place. Attracting attention to your whereabouts makes you a target. When you're ready, you'll want to do some preparation. First, if you haven't already, wash all tastes from your mouth. Do this with water. It will be available. Following this, slip back into the bouncy house. No matter if other kids are playing in it, all your supplies should still be there, exactly where you left them. If something is missing, you absolutely need to find it. If you fail to do so, you won't be able to leave. This can have extreme consequences. Only proceed if your supplies are around the circle and crayon positioned. Perform the following instructions in any order. Take your childhood book and read it in reverse. Do this for at least a minute or so. When you're done, position it upside down, back where it was before. Take your toy and play with it again, but this time, do so aggressively and without care for damaging it. When you're done, try and damage or break it. Succeeding doesn't matter, just earnestly try to damage it and you'll be good. Place the damaged toy back where it was before. Take your candy and chew it without swallowing. No matter how it tasted before, it will now have a slightly bitter, unpleasant taste. Spit it out and place the chewed remains where the candy was before. Leave the crayon where it is. With this completed, lay back down in the circle. Make sure all parts of your body are within it. Close your eyes. Relax. Fill your mind this time with all the joys of being a grown-up. The beauty of obligation and deep love. What makes it truly better than being a kid forever. Take a deep breath and say the words, "We concur on this matter. I wholeheartedly return." Once again, your senses will fade until you are solely your thoughts floating in the vastness. Wait for a minute. Hopefully, you begin to hear your song. No matter how much time you spent there, it will always start playing from the last 30 seconds. You will hear it crescendo and shine. It will sound better than it ever has. Slowly, as the end of the song comes and the music fades, your senses will return to you. You have returned, but the danger isn't over yet. You'll notice that you're back in your current body, with any warped senses repaired to their true status. Look around your circle. Your supplies should be gone except for the crayon and the music player. The latter will have stopped playing, with the song you chose paused at the end. The former will be lying as it was. Take the crayon and draw an X through your circle. Go outside, snuff out the candles, and deflate the bouncy castle. With these steps done, you can finally breathe a sigh of true relief. It's over. You have successfully returned to the reality with the experience gained from the ritual. Most people feel an end to their desire to return to childhood, and fully embrace adult life. In any case, I wouldn't try the ritual again. Your soul is now marked to the beings, and they will likely know when and if you return to that realm. Or perhaps you were stupid and didn't bother finishing what you started. If you failed to cross your circle out or perform any of these final steps in time, then congratulate yourself, as you've just opened a temporal portal for them to come to you. If I were you, I'd just off myself at that point. Otherwise, enjoy those results and the rest of your years. One school day, a boy named Tom was sitting at his desk by the window doing math. It was 6 more minutes until school ended. As he was doing his homework, something caught his eye. Looking at the grass outside, he thought he saw a picture. When school was over, he ran outside fast so that no one else could grab it. He picked it up and smiled. It was an image of the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. She had a dress with tights on and red shoes, and her hand was formed into a peace sign. She was so beautiful that he wanted to meet her, so he ran all around the school asking everyone if they knew or even had saw her before. But everyone he asked said no. He was devastated. When he got home, he asked his older sister if she knew the girl, but unfortunately, she said no. At this point, it was very late, so he walked upstairs, placed the picture on his bedside table, and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Tom was awakened by a tap on his window, like from a fingernail. It scared him. After the tapping, he heard a giggle. He saw a shadow outside, so he got out of the bed, walked toward it, opened the window, and listened for the giggling. By the time he'd reached the glass, it was gone. The next day, he asked his neighbors if they knew the girl. Nobody did. When his mother came home, he even asked her if she knew her, and she said no. Saddened, he went to his room, placed a picture on his desk, and fell asleep. Once again, he was awakened by a tapping. Taking the picture, he followed the giggling outside. He walked across the road and suddenly, he was hit by a car. He was dead on impact, the picture still in his hand. The driver got out of the car and tried to help the boy, but it was too late. He could only pick up and view the picture he was holding. He saw a cute girl, holding up 3 fingers.